I need silence so that I can hear the music. And I need darkness so that I can see the light. And I need the cold so that I can feel the warmth of another's heart. And I need to know what's wrong so that I can do what's right. I need silence so that I can hear the music. And I need darkness so that I can see the light. And I need the cold so that I can feel the warmth of another's heart. And I need to know what's wrong so that I can do what's right. I need silence so that I can hear the music. And I need darkness so that I can see the light. And I need the cold so that I can feel the warmth of another's heart. And I need to know what's wrong so that I can do what's right. I need silence so that I can hear the music. And I need darkness so that I can see the light. And I need the cold so that I can feel the warmth of another's heart. And I need to know what's wrong so that I can do what's right. I need to know what's wrong so that I can do what's right.
And now Tom has a reading for us.
Thanks, Laurel. Today our reading is by the poet Robert Bly from his book, Morning Poems. You may have heard us read this poem before, but it relates directly to today's service, so it bears repeating. Its title is One Source of Bad Information. There's a boy in you, about 3 years old, who hasn't learned a thing for 30,000 years. Sometimes it's a girl. This child had to make up its mind how to save you from death. He said things like, stay home, avoid elevators, eat only elk. You live with this child, but you don't know it. You're in the office, yes, but live with this boy at night. He's uninformed, but he does want to save your life. And he has. Because of this boy, you survived a lot. He's got 6 big ideas. 5 don't work. Right now, he's repeating them to you. And now Laurel will introduce our worship leader for today.
It is with great pleasure that I introduce our worship leader today, Noreen Cooper Heavlin. The title of her sermon today is Anger, the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Noreen has a master's in library and information science and is a professional organizer by trade. She is one of UUCC's founders and chair of the UUCC Planning Committee. Along with the many things Noreen does for UUCC, she is learning Spanish. She enjoys hiking, cooking, learning new things, and feels she has already won the lottery simply by living on the beautiful coast. Hola y bienvenidas, Noreen.
Thanks, Laurel. And good morning, everyone. One of my favorite things to do when producing UUCC online services is creating the slide deck. This is where I get to be creative. The slideshow subcommittee team works together to pair an overarching pictorial theme with the sermon topic. And the thematic deck has names like Wabi Sabi, Labyrinth, or Air Hugs. The theme of today's slide deck is cairns, the hiking guide type. But there's a bit of a Karen in here further along, a white privileged woman who demands to speak to the manager. About 6 months ago, we were searching for a photo to pair with the Robert Bly poem, One Source of Bad Information, which both honors and cautions against the whisperings of our inner child. What I found really interesting is how each one of us on the team came up with a completely different image of what that 3-year-old would look like. So one image was of an overwhelmed child, and another of an anxious child, then a pouting child, and my image was of an angry, tantruming child. So people who know me casually may not guess that I have this storming inner child inside of me, but she's there, trust me. The majority of religions, to varying degrees, caution against anger. But here we are, 2 years into the pandemic, and COVID is not done with us. The stress of social isolation has many of us on edge. We're living with anger seemingly amped to the max on all sides, whether it's causes we may strongly disagree with, like the storming of the Capitol building, or causes that we may agree with, like protests in support of Black Lives Matter. And now we find ourselves wondering how Russia's brutal invasion of Ukraine will escalate. Now, more than ever, it seems timely to zoom in on anger with a microscope and a looking glass and explore the good, the bad, and the ugly of this complex human emotion. Human history reveals a pantheon of angry gods who express their anger in many ways. The angry God we're most familiar with is the Abrahamic God, whose anger resulted in a catastrophic flood and multiple plagues. The consequences of not following the rules always brought swift justice from these ancient, all-powerful forces. I have some personal history with avoiding a more human, yet all-powerful wrath. During my childhood, there was only room for my father's anger in our home. A flaming fuse packed into a 6-foot frame weighing 290 pounds. My father, a child during the Depression and a highly decorated World War II veteran, had many scars which contributed to his hot temper. However, as a small child, his rage was frighteningly intimidating. Various siblings cope differently, but my coping strategy was to be invisible, taking great care never to cause that fuse to ignite. As a consequence, I was a very well-behaved child and teenager who gave my parents very little grief. Anger was a great deterrent to my misbehavior, much like how an all-powerful God's wrath may be a deterrent to the disobedience of believers. But, there's a price to pay with repressing anger. During my childhood, repressing anger was a smart survival strategy. However, this strategy didn't age well in my 20s and early 30s. Anger, at its best, sets limits. And by being completely out of touch with my anger, I'd often find myself in situations where I was putting up with more bad behavior than was healthy for me. one too many narcissistic partners. My attraction to Eastern religions in my 20s had much to do with distancing myself from an angry Old Testament God. Two prominent Eastern religions, Confucianism and Buddhism, view anger as a poison. People like me who are uncomfortable with their anger or the anger of others can often find solace in this way of thinking. And it is comfortable to be surrounded by people who think anger is a bad idea. However, anger is a normal human emotion. And when people try to spiritualize away their anger, the emotion is only repressed. And repressed anger never goes away. It simply comes out as passive aggression. An example of what seems like extreme anger repression can be found in the Buddhist parable of the saw. This was a Buddhist practice where monks contemplated a scenario of being cut by a robber's saw, limb by limb. But instead of filling one's mind with hatred and anger, one would only think compassionate and friendly thoughts, sending out loving kindness to the misguided robbers and to all other beings. There are real consequences to quashing anger, as I experienced in my youth. You know, I was a much sweeter, more compliant person by being so out of touch with my anger. But it took a combination of workaholic burnout, stress, health issues, and therapy to convince me that it was time to diffuse the bottled up rage that was inside of me in order to fully heal. My journey to reclaim my anger was long, it was hard, and it's ongoing, small steps, hits and misses. Success came when the limit-setting gifts of anger just came naturally to me. And that was equally reflected in better quality partners. Then one day, I found my anger was triggered too easily and too often, causing a pause to consider why all the sages, religious leaders, and philosophers caution against this emotional state. I'll give you a personal example. My son was graduating from high school and I had dropped off his suit at the local dry cleaners to be laundered. After retrieving the suit, I noticed the matching trousers were missing. His graduation was scheduled for that evening, and on top of other stressors, this was a straw that broke the camel's back. I lashed out at the attendant on duty, demanding the pants be found. She was unable to locate the pants, and I demanded to speak to the manager. I was quite angry and intimidating. I went home in my rageful state, only to find the pants were tucked inside of the button jacket. Other times I had the suit laundered, the pants were clearly displayed on a separate hanger. I felt deeply embarrassed by my actions. I realized I had become a Karen at that moment, even before the term had been coined. And that was the beginning of my journey to educate myself on the downsides of anger, reading both scientific and religious literature on the topic. So, anger is a critical survival tool, triggering the fight or flight centers in our brain. The adrenal glands get involved and produce adrenaline and cortisol, which increases heart rate, breathing rate, and blood sugar. Just what we need to avoid real danger. However, science has shown that frequent bursts of anger can permanently alter the brain. That's worth repeating. it can permanently alter the brain. Some of the long-term physical effects of unmanaged anger include high blood pressure, headache, heart attack, and stroke. So all this science, all this physiology, all this brain chemistry tells us something important. Anger is a precious resource. Anger should not be an everyday state. Science tells us, and our body certainly tells us, anger is precious. I know from my own personal story that I have less control over my anger when I'm stressed. And stress comes in many forms. And it's important when you see a raging person, unless there's a biological precept, their anger is likely a reflection of the state of stress that person is living under. So let me circle back to the Buddhist parable of the saw. Now, if you're really actually in the midst of being dismembered limb by limb, staying calm and contemplating loving kindness is not exactly the best survival strategy. Adrenaline and cortisol boost would be a much more appropriate survival response. But perhaps that's not the point of the parable of the saw. The point perhaps is this. Sometimes minor things happen, like trousers are misplaced by the dry cleaner, someone cuts in front of you in line, or you find a dent in your car after grocery shopping. And you react by, well, anger is always an option. But instead, you pause, you say to yourself, well, things could be worse. I could be having a limb sawed off right now. So if you can imagine loving kindness while my limbs are sawed off, maybe I can practice loving kindness with these trivial inconveniences in life. So maybe some of you are smiling or chuckling or laughing out loud at this, but that's exactly the point. The parable of the saw is the Buddhist way of saying, don't sweat the small stuff. Look, no trousers, and I still have all 4 limbs. Of course, that's just part of the story, isn't it? Anger is not to be squandered, expended recklessly. If we're going to be angry, we're wanting some good to come from it. There are many examples of how anger is used as a powerful moral force. Malcolm X's visible anger called for respect for his Black brothers and sisters. Cesar Chavez's anger worked to improve the lives of immigrant farm workers. And Greta Thunberg's anger continues to push for immediate action on solving our current climate change crisis. But even when anger is justified, constraint is still necessary. Marshall Gans, who spent 16 years working with Cesar Chavez, concluded that moral outrage needs to be closely monitored since it can do more harm than good. Now a lecturer at Harvard's Kennedy School, he believes that, and I quote, "For anger to be productive, at some point it must stop. Victory often demands compromise. You have to know how to arouse passions to fuel the fight, and then how to cool everyone down so they'll accept the deal on the table." When anger crosses over to plots of revenge, when we get past that point of compromise, that is when the fuel of anger becomes our funeral pyre. According to Charles Duhigg in the 2019 Atlantic article, "The Real Roots of American Rage," the more partisan people become, the more likely they are to rationalize violence against those they don't agree with, or to experience joy at their opponent's suffering, or moral disinterest when they see an opponent get attacked. and even to endorse physical assaults on other groups. And I'm not sure we can stoop much lower right now, as even public school teachers in the United States are being physically threatened by a vocal minority over the wearing of masks and teaching about race in classrooms. So for those of you who are interested in tempering your anger, I have 3 simple suggestions. First, realize that anger can become a habit if left unchecked. Like other habits, the longer it goes on, the harder it is to break. Often underneath the anger is hurt. Sometimes it's far easier psychologically to be angry than it is to feel hurt or grief. Feeling hurt can make one feel vulnerable. Spewing forth makes one feel powerful. Just remember that hurt people hurt people. Secondly, don't sweat the small stuff. We need some measure of control over those first impulses to lash out so that you can take 2 seconds to ask the following question: is this really worth getting angry over? Like when a waiter in a restaurant gets your order wrong, or a dry cleaner can't take a spot out of your shirt. Sometimes when you feel anger come up, remaining silent may be a better option. And this has nothing to do with the silent treatment. You know, that's just another form of passive aggression. But silence gives you a moment to pause and switch from reacting out of your limbic brain, which may cause you to act irrationally. Keep in mind the repercussions for anger because it can have long-lasting consequences. Confucius once said, "Consider the consequences before you get angry." When it comes to the small stuff, it's important to remember we are all imperfect beings, and kindness and forgiveness goes a long way to tempering the destructive flames of anger and revenge. Third, realize that the oppressed and disenfranchised are not given the same permissions to express anger as the Karens who demand to speak to the manager. Know that type of anger comes from white privilege. I've recently been tested in the past 3 weeks to see if I can practice what I preach. We had an unexpected refrigerator leak, which led to an asbestos abatement in 5 days of the 4 loud fans going 24/7 in our home. It was a very uncomfortable and stressful situation. I noticed at one point that the plastic enclosure to the kitchen wasn't zipped down all the way to the ground during the asbestos abatement. And my old self would have likely laid into those workers, but I didn't. I took a deep breath, calmly reminded them to zip the enclosure shut, and then opened all the windows in the house. Part of tempering my anger these days is to be reminded of the permissions I'm granted due to my skin tone color. And that's enough to deter those of us who are white, I hope. Who wants to be a Karen these days? In conclusion, let's cultivate the viewpoint that anger is a precious resource. When used wisely, anger sets limits and can propel us into action. As Unitarian Universalists, action that does good is very important to us. We're talking about social justice, racial equity, environmental justice, or just helping out one beleaguered person. Let us save our anger for doing good. In the meantime, smiling about the parable of the saw, let us breathe in a little peace. Blessed be. Amen. It's always easier to lose our temper when we are too stressed. So let's take a moment to listen to another song written by Heather Pearson called Slow Down. This song is in the tradition of mantra songs, where a phrase of positivity is repeated over and over again, creating a deep imprint in the mind, allowing our breath to steady and giving us time to reflect. So instead of counting to 10 to temper your anger, consider allowing the mantra of slow down to bring you back into balance.
Slow down.